This episode of Tech Talk with UB VPCIO Brice Bible has been edited with audio descriptions for the visually impaired. For more information about the University at Buffalo's commitment to accessibility and inclusion, visit the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion's website at buffalo.edu/equity. Tech Squad student employees troubleshoot students' computer problems. Students play computer-based video games and level up. Brice stands outside Capon Hall in front of a UB Tech Squad van.
I'm Brice Bible, UB's Vice President and Chief Information Officer. I'll be sitting down with students, faculty, staff, and other thought leaders outside of UB to highlight some important technology topics that affect campus community members like you.
Tech Talk with UB VPCIO Brice Bible. Brice stands in front of an electric-powered purple UB Tech Squad van.
Let's take a ride in one of our electric Tech Squad vans and meet our guest today.
Book the UB Tech Squad, buffalo.edu/UBIT/Tech Squad. Call 716-645-3542. Brice drives the UB Tech Squad van. Logan Merrill works in an office on a computer, walks with his cane in a hallway, and uses a DJ microphone and audio board.
Our guest today is Logan Merrill, a Unix Systems Administrator for UBIT. Logan's passion lies with the intersection of technology and accessibility. As someone with a visual impairment, Logan strives daily to ensure that the systems he develops are accessible to people with disabilities. And as you'll soon learn, technology plays an imperative role in Logan's everyday life.
Brice Bible and Logan Merrill sit across from one another in a conference room.
Well, thanks, Logan, for joining us. It's great to have you here for Tech Talk.
Thank you, Brice. I'm very much looking forward to this, and I appreciate being invited to be part of Tech Talk.
So for our audience, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself and what your journey has been that brought you to UB? And then, of course, what do you do in your role as a Unix System Administrator for us?
I have a bachelor's degree in information technology, specifically in web development, from Alfred State College, another SUNY school.
Yes, I know the CIO there.
Yep. My journey to UB essentially was that, I had, out of college in 2016, I had begun working in Rochester, New York for a company that builds websites and does merchant services for businesses all over the country. And after 6 years of working there, I had a friend who also works here at UB, works in Franzac, I believe, and she knew that I was working in IT, and so she saw a job opening as a Unix system admin here at UB, and she recommended it to me, and one thing led to another. I was able to be interviewed, and here I am. We are responsible for managing the servers that are behind many of the services that students, faculty, and staff use on a regular basis. Right. The biggest one is PeopleSoft, or I guess Hub is what the user-facing term. And so not a lot of people know this, but Hub is a very significant product. Right. There are many underlying components. There are, beyond just the user-facing production environment, there's 7 other environments: development, testing, QA. And so there's a lot that goes in behind the scenes of managing the servers and the infrastructure for products like Hub, or, RedCap is probably the other big service that we manage. And so from things like, making sure that the services are running, to renewing security certificates, right? To just doing troubleshooting, doing upgrades, right? There's, especially for Hub, there's always some things behind the scenes, to upgrades and patches and things like that. So I enjoy the work because it's challenging on a daily basis, right? You never know what'll happen from one day to the next. Yes, it's 9 to 5, but within that 9 to 5, there could be an issue that comes up. There could be an upgrade request. The customer could ask you for something. It's always a challenge, always a new thing. And so I'm always being pushed further and further to, challenge myself to strive and to improve our processes and procedures, with the end goal of giving customers, students, faculty, and staff the best experience that we can with all the services that we support.
Well, that's great to have you. And by the way, thank you for joining us.
Of course.
We really
I
appreciate you
appreciate
being here.
Definitely.
UB's a great place to be.
Oh, it is.
We're
It
really
is.
glad to have you aboard. I want to ask you about being a DJ, though. We understand you're also a DJ. So
Yes.
what's that all about?
Yeah, so I've been a radio DJ for about, oh my gosh, probably 12 years now,
Okay.
in various radio stations across New York State. It's quite exciting because, I'm very big into music, being a guitarist, pianist, drummer, singer.
Nice.
And so one of the ways that I figured I could share my love of music with the world, right, was to be a radio DJ and be able to be on the air and to be behind the mic. And it's a lot of fun because I get to share my taste in music with others. And when I'm behind the mic, my job on the air is to hopefully be able to play a song or say a word, whatever, that can encourage, that can uplift, right? You never know who might be listening to you at any given time, right? And what they might be going through. So if I can make someone's day, make somebody smile, whatever, by the end of my show, then I know that I've done my job properly.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. That's awesome, Logan. And so what's your favorite genre, or do you have a favorite music genre?
Honestly, it varies significantly,
Yeah.
and it can change all the time. Being a guitarist, I do like, the more acoustic side of things.
Sure.
But being a drummer, I also like, rock and stuff like that with a lot of drums. On my show that airs every Thursdays, 5 to 8 p.m., I try to play a variety of music, so
Well,
that
tell us where it
something for
is.
everyone.
What station is your show on?
My current show is a station out of Rochester, New York, when I lived there,
Okay.
Rochester Free Radio. But the station streams on the internet, right? So anyone over the world
Okay.
can tune in. So now here in Buffalo, I'm able to do my show from my townhouse and stream that back to the studio to go out live over the air. So if people want to tune in, rochesterfreeradio.com is the address. Again, rochesterfreeradio.com, Thursdays, 5 to 8 p.m.
I think it'd be great if you could share your personal story. And then you obviously have a passion because you're willing to come here and talk about the intersection of technology and accessibility. So talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
I was born with a rare eye condition called microphthalmia. Basically, I was born about a month early, prematurely, and so my eyes are underdeveloped. People always tell me they look closed, for example, even when they're open because they're just smaller than normal. And so I've been pretty much completely blind almost my entire life. When I was younger, I had the ability to see some colors and shapes, but I really never had what you would consider to be eyesight, right? I could never read print, so I learned to read Braille instead. And so my lack of vision has really fueled my my love of technology, right? Because I use so much of it on a daily basis. And then B, my desire to see technology improved and made more accessible for myself and for others, that might have visual impairments or other disabilities.
I appreciate you sharing your story, but I want you to be vocal and make sure that I'm listening and the university's listening to needs you have and others, because as you say, you're addressing it not just for you, but you're also addressing it for others. Talk about how technology works in your whole day, your personal life outside, how you use it at work. What do you do with technology through your day?
So I have a MacBook Pro laptop as my main daily device, and there's a program on my Mac called VoiceOver.
Today at 1:56 p.m. Blackout is for the disk space. Not sure how much more disk. Just more. 50 gigabytes should be plenty. Mark Bellitis today at 1.
And what it is it's a program that will read the content of the screen aloud to me, right? So I can use the keyboard to navigate around the arrow keys and et cetera. And whatever I land on will be read out loud. So I can use that to use apps like email or web browsing or writing documents, things of that nature. Same as on my phone, right? I'm able to tap around the screen and be able to use it that way. So a lot of what I do with tech during the day is done on the computer or done on the phone. But even outside of that, right, my cane, right, that I use to, when I'm walking around outside, for example, I'm using my cane to assist in getting around. Outside when I'm crossing streets, right, there's technology even there. There's, the little push buttons at the crosswalks. I think there's a lot of even just smaller bits and pieces of tech that some might not even realize exist, right? Or that are out there that I'm able to use when I'm at home doing various things. There's even some low tech solutions, like there's Braille that I have on my laundry machines at home, so I know like where to set the dials to, right? Just very some low tech, some high tech, solutions that I'm that I have.
Do you think some of these new technologies like artificial intelligence, does it have the potential to benefit those with accessibility needs?
I definitely do think so. In fact, there's actually already some AI technology out there. There's an app for the iPhone called Seeing AI, and what it is it's kind of like an all-in-one app where it has different functions to help the visually impaired. There's a function that will, if you point your phone's camera at a document or at like a letter or whatever, right, an envelope, it will scan the text and read it out loud to you. So I use that to read my mail, for example.
Oh, that's cool.
There's a function that will tell me if a room is lit up, right? So I can point it at a space and it will tell me how bright the room is. So if I'm at home and I'm like, oh, have I turned this light on or off? I can point the app at that. Part of the app will tell me if I'm holding bills or coins. It will tell me the amounts. There's one for telling what color something is, right? So, and all of that uses AI. The latest development is that when I'm crossing a street, there's a new app that just came out where you point the phone at the walking man sign thing and the street crossing, and it will tell you whether it's safe to cross by using AI to look at that, right, to observe that. I think AI can be abused, unfortunately, as well.
Yeah,
I'm sure that we've seen that, over the years. But as far as accessibility, there is a lot that AI has done, and I'm sure we'll be able to do more in the future.
So UB is concerned about accessibility of all kinds for all needs with our students. I guess you've been with us for a while. Mm-hmm. What have you found positive about UB's support for accessibility for faculty and staff and students?
I will definitely agree with you. UB definitely is concerned about accessibility, and they've gone above and beyond, even just for me, for example, in helping to make my experience here as accessible as possible. Staff are always asking, like, okay, what do you need that to improve accessibility? How can we make these services accessible? There are a lot of tools that I use in my work as a Unix Systems admin that aren't necessarily campus facing, right? They're not campus wide. But even so, the staff, all of the managers and others here still work to make that accessible for me. And I think that's important because that shows that UB is committed to accessibility both for campus-wide services, right? I guess that's easier, but then also for more internal services. Even then, it would be very easy for UB to say, oh, well, this is just an internal service, right? It doesn't need to be, it's not campus facing. No one's really going to care, besides you and then maybe a dozen other people. But UB has worked with me and make a lot of our internal and external services more accessible.
We'll talk about web just a little bit, because that's probably the biggest challenge for individuals these days, that have accessibility challenges. What steps do you think UB should take, and how well have we done? And I have to give the university credit, just as you have.
Of course,
we have federal laws that require certain levels of accessibility, but I have really appreciated the university leadership in that we're not doing this because it's a federal requirement. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Of course.
And so what do you think needs to be done there, and how is that progressing?
One of the reasons that I got into web development in the first place was that I noticed that the landscape of the web for the visually impaired and for others with disabilities leaves some things to be desired, let's just say. And so I thought that hopefully as a web developer, right, I can kind of help move, sites and apps towards a more accessible landscape. I will also commend, the university for having a very accessible website, right? There's been a lot that's been done already. There are standards out there, right? There are federal laws, as you mentioned, but there are also standards that the World Wide Web Consortium has developed that webmasters like UB, for example, can follow in terms of how to make their sites accessible, right? I'm sure that there are little things here and there that can be worked on and improved upon. There's nothing significant that stands out in terms of what could be done, could be improved upon in the future. I think that things are already very accessible as they are.
What should you be aware of, particularly if you are going into software development or web development or any technology field? What are the things, if you could speak to every senior class of computer scientists and electrical engineers and others. By the way, we could probably make that happen if you're interested. But
yeah, definitely.
but what would you like them to know?
Don't make accessibility an afterthought. I think that's unfortunately something that is done quite often, right? You see whether it's in software, whether it's in architecture even, right? Whether it's in, many other fields. We all want to blame somebody, right? When things don't, when things go wrong. But if you build a website or an app, let's say, or you build a building or what have you, if you create something and then you try and make it accessible, it'll be a lot more difficult to do that on the back end. So like I said, my number one, piece of advice would be to think about accessibility during your development, during your workflow, during your build process. If you can, talk to people that have disabilities, whether that's visual impairment, whether that's anything else, right? It's you can do all the research you want, and research is good. I know that UB is a big research institution, and so research is very important. But at the end of the day, you need to get perspective from people who live this on a daily basis, day in and day out.
I think to your point, maybe every single graduate of the university, irregardless of what program they're in, whether it's technology or architecture or that should be a key aspect for them. And I think it's a great point.
Yeah,
it's certainly a great point. So we had an all-staff meeting a few weeks back, and you brought up a point about Microsoft and about, I want to say SharePoint. But
yes, yep.
So first question is, has that been resolved? And second question is, as we buy and implement more cloud services, we'll have less control over what kinds of features, including accessible features. So I guess, tell me a little bit about SharePoint.
Yeah, so first off, for those who might not be aware, SharePoint is a collaborative platform for storing documentation and other things like that. And so one of the big issues that I was having with SharePoint in terms of accessibility is that the editor, right, when you go in to edit pages, it looks like Microsoft Word, right? It's very visual. You can change the font and the colors and the styling and you can add lists and tables but that doesn't really translate very well to the visually impaired, right? How do you make a visual kind of what you see is what you get editor, more accessible? And so that was really the big issue I was having with SharePoint is how am I going to be able to edit pages? It unfortunately has not been resolved yet at this point, and that's primarily because SharePoint being a cloud service, right? As you just alluded to, UB has less and less control over how these services work, and Microsoft is sad to say, but they're unwilling to make changes in SharePoint itself to make their editor more accessible, right? They don't really see it as a big deal. They rely on third parties who develop accessible solutions. So what has been put in place instead, right, as an alternate solution, is that the university has purchased a program that I'm able to use that works with SharePoint and that has its own accessible editor and its own accessible features. And that's great. It works well, but it's rather sad to see that Microsoft is choosing to farm this out, if you will, to third parties, right? To rely on them versus just making their own first-party products more accessible. It's very upsetting for me as someone with a disability to see that that's what they're doing and that's what they're choosing to do. And they're such a big company, and so other companies are watching Microsoft and they're watching Apple and they're looking at these companies and saying, "What are you doing to be accessible, and how can I emulate that?"
At least you found a workaround, and that's too bad that it's not native to the product, but at least you found a workaround.
And to your point about when the university is buying software, right? That's definitely one thing to take into account. I don't know what was all involved with buying SharePoint. Obviously, we have a relationship with Microsoft already, right? So I'm sure that was a big draw in the decision. I think the university should be consulting with people that are going to use the software they purchase, right, that might have a disability, and ask them, okay, can you preview this for us, right? Can you tell us what might not be accessible? So we can go to the vendor before we make the purchase and say, okay, if we purchase the software, before we purchase, can we get a commitment from you as the vendor, right, to here's the accessibility concerns we found. Can we get a a commitment from you to make these improvements before we actually make a purchase.
I think it's a great idea, and some solutions, university I think does a decent job, a pretty good job of point solutions. So when we want to buy a product that's fairly single purposed, then we do it. The university does a deep dive, both security, performance, and accessibility. But some of these larger solutions, that have multiple components in it, like a Microsoft, I think that kind of gets lost in the noise. And I think it's important for us to think about how we, what are better ways that we can drive that.
If I could wave a magic wand right now and say, okay, I would wave my wand and I would get rid of SharePoint and move to a more accessible solution out of the box. But given that that's really not an option, I think that for now, as I said, we have the somewhat accessible alternative. But I think going forward, as we look to purchase additional solutions, even for the bigger components, it will be, as I said, important to just to evaluate accessibility along with all of the other performance, security, as you mentioned.
Yes.
Talk with vendors, so that we don't get trapped in a situation that we're in now, where we aren't, as much as I might want us to, right? We aren't diverging from SharePoint or other Microsoft apps anytime soon. So how can we make the best of what we already have?
The workaround that you found through the third party, we should definitely make that available to the whole campus, all users, because there will be folks that are like you that need that extra. But we're also negotiating our next round of contracts with Microsoft, and I can tell you there's one CIO that'll make sure that this particular topic is on the table.
Definitely.
And at least have them give us a roadmap of what's their thinking and when will they get there.
This should be low-hanging fruit for Microsoft. I mean, I know that obviously money isn't everything, right? But you look at these big companies like Microsoft, you look at they charge hundreds of thousands of dollars for contracts and for software. So this is low-hanging fruit for them, in that right now, they're like I said, they're farming accessibility of SharePoint, for example, out to third parties. The third parties are making the big bucks, right? But Microsoft could very easily get more customers by making SharePoint more accessible. I mean, again, not that it's all about the money, obviously, but I just don't. It just blows my mind that they're not. The alternative that we purchased, right, $10,000. For a single user license, right? That's a lot of money. It's on the table. It's out there. And again, that goes to my earlier point, right? Don't make accessibility as an afterthought, right? It's much harder to adapt SharePoint now, right, than it would have been
if it had been done natively. Yes.
Right, and you can gain more customers, right? If you're a business, obviously you want to get more customers. You want to get more people in your door or using your services and your products, right? And so if you can add accessibility or build that in, then that's one way to guarantee that you'll get additional customers that actually use your product and like it and will tell their friends about it, and we'll get more people to use it.
I think more close to home, we definitely want to make sure that the university and anything that IT has a input into or even control over, let's make sure anything we do has thought first about accessibility and not do it as an afterthought. And I appreciate you being willing to come and talk.
Of course.
I think our audience will find this very interesting. Again, we appreciate what you do for UB. And of course, we're going to listen to your radio show too.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And again, I appreciate being able to come and talk with you. And accessibility isn't often talked about. I get asked all the time, how do you do this? How do you use a cell phone? How do you get around campus? How do you, I'm happy to answer questions all day long. I'm happy to bring accessibility to the foreground and just to let people know that there are already great solutions out there. And as technology moves forward, I think that the landscape will get even better. And I'm very excited to see what is coming in the future for accessibility, for tech in general, for AI, for UB. I think that the future is very bright on all of those fronts.
Well, that's good to hear. It's a very positive way to end our talk. And again, thank you so much for joining me today. And this has been very informative. Great. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
A montage of Brice and past guests from previous Tech Talk episodes smiling and laughing together. behind-the-scenes podcast production photos with Brice, guests, and UBIT employees.
Well, I will be leaving the University of Buffalo at the end of February, so this will be my last episode of Tech Talk. It has been a lot of fun and informative. I've hoped you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed it. We've had some great conversations. We've learned a lot about things going on in the campus and outside. I really do hope that UBIT will continue this, and I will definitely keep up with it in the future. So thank you to everyone who's participated. Thank you to the team that has put this together and made it so professionally done. It's been my pleasure. Thanks for watching this episode of Tech Talk. Check out our other episodes online anytime at buffalo.edu/UBIT/Tech Talk.
UB University at Buffalo, the State University at New York, buffalo.edu, #UBuffalo.